option values. So what do you understand by option? So these values or these values which are associated with the biodiversity, it is actually keeping future possibilities open. So supposedly some of the biodiversity is used for a particular thing, and now it has become, or now it has been pushed to the brink of extinction. Then we need a replacement, and for that we keep the future possibilities open, and this is related to option value. So keeping future possibilities open for their use is known as optional values. And how can we increase the optional values of the biodiversity? It is just by improving the cultivars or domestic livestock or the crop population which we are growing. So if we will keep on improving those plants, we are obviously making them more useful. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now coming to sacred groves. So this is an example of conservation. So it is a very good example of conservation of the entire forest. So this is done by the efforts of the local people, and local people have made a social fence around some of the forests which are important in their culture, or maybe they want to preserve, and these forests are untouched. So human activities are strictly prohibited, and these are conserved as virgin forests. So all the endemic species are protected, and they are harboring a rich biodiversity. And this is all done by the local communities or the tribal people, which put in a lot of effort to conserve that forest as a whole. You can imagine these days conserving the entire forest. It will take a lot of effort, right? Because we are felling trees on a very large scale, which is leading to deforestation. So at this time, conserve this kind of conservation strategy becomes all the more important. So you are just social fencing the forest, and you are conserving it as it is. So this becomes a link between culture and biodiversity. Do you understand that subtle link between culture and biodiversity? So the local people, they are, the tribal people and the local people are preserving the forest
Protecting.
as it is. Okay, and these are known as sacred groves. So in India, sacred groves are known by several names. We have Kavu in Kerala, then we have uh, other names in other states.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, if a particular community protects a forest, ma'am, due to your religion, ma'am, for example, the Mathura forest is protected because it is associated with Hinduism. So that will be called sacred groves or not?
So important thing here is that forest should be untouched. Entire forest is protected. So even if it
Oh,
is due to religion, then it is a part of culture. And sacred groves are an important link between culture and biodiversity.
okay, ma'am.
So it is known by different names in different states, but still the type of conservation is also different at different places. So the conservation strategies, they vary according to their nature, distribution, and local beliefs. So this is an example of a sacred grove. You can see how rich it is in biodiversity. You can see the lush green vegetation, and you can see the track of the forest. It is all covered with vegetation. This is an effort of conservation strategies of local people, of the tribal people, which want these forests to survive because they want to retain their culture and values. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
So, after discussing all of these, after talking about biodiversity, the IUCN, the biogeographic zones, so we have got a great idea of what is biodiversity, how it is distributed, how can we protect it. But we have to address a very important question now. What are the threats to these resources, these living forms? And to cover the threats of biodiversity, we will majorly focus on first. First is the habitat, be it habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation. Then we will also look at poaching of wildlife, which is a major contributor to biodiversity loss. Then moving on to wildlife conflicts. Then we will study about biological invasion and current mass extinction crisis. So these are the major threats to the biodiversity. The threat which we are discussing first is the most important because of habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation. The biodiversity is getting extinct or is being pushed to the brink of extinction. What do you understand by the term habitat?
The area in which the biodiversity lives, like the animals live, the
Home.
native area. Yes.
It's the home of that resource. So a particular resource has a niche, so it survives and functions in that. So that is why habitat is very important. What will happen if that habitat is degraded?
Ma'am, it will have a direct impact on the population. Some will move to other places and some will, ma'am, face extinction.
What can you repeat?
Like displacement of these species from one place to another, basically.
Yes, displacement would be there, and also there will be loss of biodiversity. There will be chances of extinction.
Extinction.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what do you think, what are the reasons of these habitat fragmentation and habitat destruction or degradation or habitat loss? What are the major reasons? You can
There
make
is
it
Ma'am,
more
deforestation.
theoretical.
ma'am, increasing population is the main cause of habitat fragmentation.
Yes, because the human population is increasing, so we need more and more land resources for settlement, and we are clearing up more and more forests. And we also require mm, forests, we also require
Firewood.
land for agricultural productivity. So that is also putting up a pressure on biodiversity. Apart from that, ecosystem services biodiversity से बहुत ज़्यादा होते हैं. So we get a lot of services from the biodiversity, and since we are increasing in populations, our demands are increasing. So industrialization is also being pushed. So and this is a vicious cycle. So we actually get our resources from these forests and natural resources. So to cater to our needs also, biodiversity is decreasing rapidly. So we are over exploiting whatever resources are available. And in this over exploitation, we just degrade the natural habitats of these poor plants and animals. You can see in this picture how a forest is degraded, how a habitat is degraded. So this type of destruction actually leads to extinction. Okay, so
Yes, ma'am.
destruction में और habitat loss में पूरा balance is getting disrupted. And in habitat fragmentation, the only difference is that a particular habitat is broken up into isolated patches. So that is also a threat to many of the species which are living in that area or which are which are endemic. Sorry. Okay, so you understood the difference between habitat destruction, habitat loss, and habitat fragmentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Apart from this, since we have polluted resources, we have air, water, and land pollution. So this is also decreasing the species and causing a destruction of the natural ecosystems, and the habitat is itself getting destructed. So this is another reason. And nowadays, habitat destruction, fragmentation, and degradation is tremendously increasing. And we all know the reasons for it. And one of the reasons for this is the urban sprawl. So can you see how strategically forests are being cleared and concrete is being spread? So this is leading to habitat degradation. So what does habitat degradation leads to? Extinction तो समझ में आ गया, biodiversity loss भी समझ में आ गया, ecosystem balance disruption, that is also understood. But we can also add to this one more reason. Now, due to fragmentation, when the animal species or plant species would be translocated, then these will also expose some of the microorganisms in newer areas. And what will be the consequence of that?
Ma'am, can you please repeat the question?
So when there will be habitat fragmentation or habitat loss or habitat destruction, the species will move, they will get translocated. And we all know that living forms, they harbor microorganisms for their function. And when the living species are moving, then the microorganisms are also being exposed to the newer environments in which these were not present earlier. So what would be the effect of that?
Ma'am, new type of disease variant will develop.
Exactly. Yes. And we will face what we are facing today. ये जो सब आप ऑनलाइन क्लासेस के सिस्टम से पढ़ रहे हो ना, it is all the effect of environmental degradation, climate change, habitat destruction. So it will become a cause of pandemics and epidemics. जो microorganisms अपने habitats, अपने niche में protected थे, due to the destruction of habitats, they will also get translocated or they will also spread. Okay.
Yes.
Now coming
ma'am.
to another reason, which is a major threat to biodiversity. So we all know poaching is one of that, and this is really very general. So I would like you all to discuss, what do you understand by poaching and hunting?
Ma'am, illegal killing of animals, especially wild animals, those are can be beneficial for trading.
Yes, yes.
And poaching is
So
on large scale also, like what Sarah
Ma'am,
explained.
today I was reading the Times of India newspaper. There is an incident in New Delhi recently. This week, uh, monitor lizard and I think elephants something to any मतलब कुछ में मिला है अभी मैम इन लोग
okay,
को इसमें अभी इसी वीक की है मैम दिल्ली की मैम न्यूज़ है मैम
okay. So what does poaching leads to? Again, loss of biodiversity. So why poaching is done? It is done for large economic benefits. Example, poaching ka?
Deer,
Ma'am, the Tuscasa elephants.
Yes,
No, not
I
hunting down
agree.
elephant,
dinosaurs for their
ivory,
horns.
yes.
Horns from rhinos, then
Yes, ma'am.
perfume from musk
and ma'am,
deer.
skin of animals, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
tiger,
Twins
tiger.
and
Ma'am,
all.
the
Teeth of
leather.
elephant. Asian.
Yes, that is also there. And what about corals? Even corals are
Yes, ma'am.
exploited, and
Yes.
shells. So I
Yes, ma'am.
hope all of you know that these shells are home to small insects. So lower Invertebrates. So they keep their bodies protected in the shells. And what we do, we take out these shells, we collect and export them, or we sell them. And when we are collecting these shells, what we are doing, we are harming these insects. And again, each and every species is important for ecosystem. So these insects are also very important for sustaining the ecosystem. Same happens with pearl. So pearl, it grows in again oysters.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
it is extensively used in jewelry. So we take out these pearl and we harm the insect. And not only animals, but plants are also uh, illegally uprooted and harvested and sold. And we have some plants which have very high medicinal values. So these plants, they are exploited. So many regions of Uttarakhand and Haridwar, so they have lost their natural medicinal plants. What happens is plants, when they grow under stress conditions, so which is mostly in the colder environment, they secrete some chemicals which are known as secondary metabolites. And due to these secondary metabolites, plants have the medicinal properties. तो जो हाई ऑल्टीट्यूड्स पे प्लांट ग्रो करते हैं, उनको वो स्ट्रेस से ज़्यादा एक्सपोज होते हैं ड्यू टू कोल्डर टेम्परेचर्स एंड ड्राई वेदर. So they produce a lot of secondary metabolites, and they are medicinally very important. So what people do is they harvest those plants, they illegally uproot them and harvest them and obtain the medicine. And in doing so, what they are doing, they are just destructing that natural uh, environment and destructing the biodiversity. So destructing the population of that plant species. उतने level तक destruct कर देते हैं कि उसका revival becomes very difficult. So this was with poaching. And what about wildlife man conflict?
Ma'am, these are the direct consequence of fragmentation, ma'am. When fragmentation is done, the animals move from one place to another, and
Yeah.
they get in contact with the humans.
Yeah, so there when the animals they encroach the human settlements, there is always a tussle between humans and animals. And this is actually destructive for both the species. या तो animal को harm होगा या तो human को harm होगा. So when such kind of activities occur, then it is detrimental for biodiversity. So very famous kind of a man-wild conflict is that of elephants. So ये बहुत होता है, and elephants they cross the their territories and come to crop farms and destruct the crops and eat it. So that is why there is a lot of conflict between humans and elephants. So that is again shrinking the biodiversity or populations of the species involved. Obviously humans से ज़्यादा animals और animals को ही effect होगा. Human population is all the more exploding, and it is putting a pressure on the habitats of these species, and due to that man and wildlife conflicts are occurring at a much faster pace. So we have to devise some policies, and then we have to solve all these issues. So if you see, this is the effects of poaching. So one horn rhino is divide off now its horn, and tusks of elephants are being removed for ivory. Next, the threat is the invasive species. This is also known as biotic pollution. What do you understand by the term invasive? So when it is becoming harmful for the system. If we talk about in terms of species, then it is that kind of a species which when enters the ecosystem, it grows, it flourishes, and then it upsets the balance among organisms which are living over there. So obviously there would be a competition for space and nutrition. Okay. So what
Yes,
will
yes.
happen? There will be enormous pressure on the ecosystem to sustain that species also and to sustain the earlier species which were present. So that is why invasive species are known as a pollution. So this is a form of biotic pollution. तो अभी तक तो हमने abiotic pollution पढ़ा था, but this is a major biotic pollution and it is actually डिग्रेडिंग मैनी इकोसिस्टम्स, पूरा का पूरा इकोसिस्टम होम्योस्टैसिस को एकदम खत्म कर देता है because due to a competition for space and nutrients, the other endemic plants and animals are unable to survive. Then if they are not able to survive, then what will happen? Obviously the biodiversity will decrease. The populations of these endemic species will start to decline. And unlike the other forms of pollution, which we can clean or we can manage, but biotic pollution is mostly permanent. It is very difficult to stop that kind of invasive species because it is adapted enough to thrive very well in that ecosystem. So that is why it is very difficult to stop this kind of pollution. And if this species is preying upon some natural species in that ecosystem, then again the prey predator relationship will also have a greater negative effect as compared to the natural native competitors or predators. So in all aspects, the biotic pollution by invasive species is alarming, and this cause enormous economic as well as environmental harm. So foreign species whose introduction causes economic or environmental harm are known as the invasive species. How do you think these invasive species are introduced into some areas or ecosystems?
Ma'am, likewise, we are reading that water hyacinth was introduced in Bengal
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the purpose of floration because its flowers are likewise very beautiful.
But now it has become a nuisance because it is clogging many of the
Covering always.
waterways.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And it
Because
is
Yes,
also
ma'am.
increasing the
consumes a lot
biological
of water.
oxygen demand of the water body because it is consuming the oxygen also. So in a way taking up
Ma'am,
the resources now. Yes.
ma'am, similarly, pythons were introduced in the forest of Australia, but now they are a nuisance there.
Yeah. So it is majorly done by human activities, but कभी कभी natural means से भी हो जाता है. So due to pollination schemes which are present in the nature, they can also introduce invasive species. And other natural means are also responsible. But majorly humans are responsible, and this is the humans do it either knowingly or unknowingly. So somebody has asked a question in the chat box. Can you, Yashwant, yeah. So what is your question?
मैम मैं ये कह रहा था कि कुछ दिन पहले मैंने पेपर में पढ़ा था कि जैसे आज के मतलब दृश्य में क्या हो रहा है कि लोकल लैंग्वेजेज अब मतलब लोग भूलते जा रहे हैं और इंग्लिश मतलब जो एक वर्ल्ड वाइड लेवल पे जो लैंग्वेज है उसको सीखते जा रहे थे। तो एक रिसर्च था उसमें कि आने वाले 10 से 15 सालों में जो लोकल लैंग्वेजेज के कारण जो मतलब कि बहुत सारे जैसे जड़ी बूटियों की प्लांट्स होती है, एस्थेटिक प्लांट्स होती है, तो वो सब मतलब लॉस होने का खतरा है 60 to 70%। तो ये भी एक फैक्टर हो सकता है, तो ये मैं बताना चाह रहा था।
If we think about it, then what will happen? So if you can consider here the example of the tribal people. So if the local languages are not that protected, then these tribal people will not be able to communicate. And obviously, these tribal communities, they are very efficient in using the plant species on a day-to-day basis, and even they use it for medicinal purposes.
यस मैम।
So,
और उसमें
so
मेंशन क्या होता है कि
they
जानकारी
will
को हम
not
लोग
be able
वैसे
to, yes. So they will not be able to communicate, and we cannot carry forward the legacy. And अगर ऐसा हुआ तो हमें जो जिन plants और जिन endemic plant species के बारे में information नहीं है, then they may get affected. So you can say this is a reason, but this is a very, very, very indirect reason. So
यस मैम।
it may or may not lead to a loss of biodiversity. So this can be put under an indirect reason.
यस मैम, थैंक यू मैम।
Okay. So invasive species, they harm our lands, water and native species. So it is a great threat to the environment. Now coming to the last part of threats to biodiversity, this is the mass extinction. Normal extinction species का होता रहता है, and there is a continuous low level extinction of species at one time or the other, and Earth has seen this kind of extinction. But when a lot of species, they disappear at the same time, so also at the same time or during a relatively short period of geological time scale, then it is mass extinction. क्योंकि बहुत सारे स्पीशीज एक साथ ही एक्सटिंक्ट हो रहे हैं, या तो एक साथ एक्सटिंक्ट हो रहे हैं या फिर बहुत कम टाइम में एक्सटिंक्ट हो रहे हैं. सो दिस इज नोन एज mass extinction. So Earth's history has seen 5 to 6 mass extinctions of like these. So what would be the effect of these mass extinction? Obviously, pura ka pura ecosystem would be destroyed, because many species are collapsing at a single time. And we still do not know what are the causes of such enormous mass extinctions. So we are trying to understand, but we still have some hints that it is maybe because of biological or environmental factors, because change in the climate can lead to mass extinction of species. So due to global warming, there is rise in the temperatures of the earth, which will lead to melting of the polar ice caps, and some low-lying areas will be inundated, and due to that uh, inundation, what will happen? Many of the species will get extinct altogether. This is, we can say that this is one reason of mass extinction of species, but we still not know what is the exact pinpoint cause. So it is not that well understood. But yes, this extinction is greatly accelerated by human activity. So whatever is happening, it is a cause and consequence of anthropogenic activities only. So you understood mass extinction?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So after discussing about the threats to biodiversity, next which falls into place is the biodiversity conservation. Why should we conserve the biodiversity? Why should
Environmental losses and ecosystems.
ताकि
हाँ.
भविष्य में हम लोग जिंदा रह सकें.
Yes, one sentence answer. Yeah, but if you have to sustain, then you need biodiversity. Each and every species is important, and these are very important for the sustenance of the ecosystem. If we want to maintain the homeostasis in ecosystem, we require these precious biodiversity resources be it plant, animal or any other life form. सबका अपना function है और इसी function की वजह से ecosystem आज sustain कर रहा है. Otherwise it would have got destructed and life on earth would have been very, very difficult. Although we understand that biodiversity is important, but still we are utilizing it or over exploiting it because our populations are increasing. So that's why it becomes all the more important to start its conservation immediately, and we have taken steps, and those steps have actually benefited many animal populations. If you see tiger, elephant, all these have been now restored, although they are still under threats, but these efforts have actually paid, and we have restored the population of such animals and plant species. So that's why conservation becomes very, very important, and it is the need of the hour. Now, if we see in conservation, we will study these broad topics. First of all, we will study the strategies, what is in situ and what is ex situ methods of conservation. Then in that only, we will study national parks, wildlife sanctuary, biosphere reserves. Then we will also study about the keystone species, flagship species, umbrella and indicator species. And then at the last, we will study species reintroduction and translocation. So we will start with the in situ. Today we will cover the in situ conservation only, and then we will end the class. So what do you understand by in situ conservation? In situ is in the habitat. So जिस habitat में भी हम रह रहे हैं, we will conserve the biodiversity in their natural habitat. That is what is meant by in situ conservation. And there are basically two strategies for conserving, in situ and ex situ. And out of that, the in situ is conserving in the natural habitats, whereas ex situ is out of that habitat. And if we are talking about conservation, then what do you think would be the objectives of the conservation biology? So इन situ ex situ conservation तो करेंगे, लेकिन उससे पहले हमें conservation biology को understand करना पड़ेगा. We have discussed the reason that why do we need conservation. वो हम सबको पता है कि deforestation हो रहा है, land destruction है, habitat fragmentation है, and we are losing biodiversity. We have made the list through IUCN. But how we will bring about this conservation? So for that, we need to understand what is conservation biology. So if I am a conservation biologist, then I will be interested in studying the processes which actually lead to the decline in the populations of animal, plants, and even the microorganisms or whatever life forms are available. So first, I will be studying what is actually leading to that decline and what is the cause of such level of destruction. And then after collecting data about that, I will look into the protection of these species. And not only protection, I will also try to restore the population of these species so as to again bring them back in their natural habitats. So this is what is the focus of conservation biology. So conservation biologists, they develop models, design experiments, and perform field work to address conservation of biodiversity. So in situ means conserving the species in their natural habitat, and we have three types here. The first one is the national park. National park की ये speciality है that the entire ecosystem is protected. So biotic, abiotic components, everything is protected, and it works on core and buffer zone strategy. So in the core zone, what will happen? That area will be completely prohibited. It will be inaccessible for humans. So we are conserving the essence of that ecosystem in a very complete manner. But we have a peripheral buffer zone, and in that buffer zone, we are allowing human activities like fuel wood collection or maybe tourism. So we have examples of Jim Corbett National Park and Rajaji National Park. So these are some to name of. And Jim Corbett, as you all know, what is the speciality of Corbett National Park?
One horn rhino.
Ma'am, tiger.
No, that is
Tigers.
Tiger,
Kazi.
tiger.
Bengal
Oh
tiger.
yeah, sorry, sorry,
Jim
sorry.
जिम कॉर्बेट सबसे फर्स्ट नेशनल पार्क है इस कंट्री का.
Yes, ma'am.
The first one to get established. So it has a lot of gates through which we can enter the buffer zone, and also the core zone is typically protected from the human activity. And coming to the wildlife sanctuary, sanctuary is there to conserve a particular species which may be of local, national, or international significance. So it is created to conserve a particular species. So again, we have a core and buffer strategy here. So core completely restricted hoga, but buffer में some of the human activities would be allowed. So we have the example of Chilika Park Sanctuary here. Then the third one is the Biosphere Reserve. Biosphere reserves, these are based upon the concepts of sustainable development. So we are not only focused upon protecting the ecosystem, but we are also managing the interactions between social and ecological systems. So when we are talking about a link between social and ecological systems, then obviously we will here include the human life also. So this is the difference between biosphere reserve and the other two. So here we are protecting the areas, but still this is on the concept of including humans in the conservation efforts. And this was formulated during the Man and Biosphere program of UNESCO. So biosphere reserves are conserving the biodiversity as well as providing livelihood to people. So in this we will have forestry, agriculture, tourism, so that all will be allowed. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So with this, we have completed the in situ conservation. So we still have time. I think we can move on to the ex situ. Ex situ is preserving the animals out of their natural habitat. And we have the famous example of the zoological parks or the zoos. All of you must be knowing what are zoos. So in these majorly animal species or sometimes the plant species. So since it is a zoological park, then obviously it will be the animal species. So it is kept in artificial enclosures. And this is about educating citizens about the wildlife, how the animals look like, because everyone cannot go into the forest and see the species diversity and different kinds of animals which are there. So this is the main purpose, is educating citizens over here, and these are kept in artificial enclosures. Not only this, many of the animals are breeded here, so there are breeding programs which are carried out. Breeding programs also increase the population of the species, and since you are increasing the population, you can also reintroduce some of the species from the zoo back into their natural habitats. So this is the ex situ conservation strategy of the zoological parks. Coming to the next one, it is the gene bank, and in the gene banks we are just preserving the genes of different species, so the good traits. So we discussed about all these things, right? What are genes, so and how they influence the species, and what are the important traits. याद है सब लोगों को?
Yes, ma'am.
So we try to conserve those genes of different species which are superior traits, such as high yielding varieties of plant or maybe stress resistant plants. So we conserve those species and we have special institutes for that. ऐसा ही plants के लिए एक है National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources. So it is storing and preserving genes of plant species. Likewise, the gene bank, we also have seed banks. So gene banks में gene store होते हैं. So in the seed banks, what we are doing, we are just storing the seeds of some plants for future use. So some of the plant, if it gets extinct in near future, then we can always take up the seed and we can grow it. And not only that, if we want to grow some plants in our home, then also we can take the seeds from the seed bank and grow them. So it is a very good method to protect the plant species. So we have Indian Agricultural Research Institute, which is a very good seed bank located in Delhi. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we are conserving natural resources or conserving biodiversity, what are the challenges in the conservation management? First of all, conservation क्यों चाहिए? क्योंकि human activities are threatening these resources. So this will actually disrupt the ecosystem. So we understand this and we are living through it. We are seeing the climate change. We are seeing the pollution. We are seeing the extinction of many species. Now that we know that it is an alarming factor, then we need to address it. And when we have to address it, then we need to know the knowledge about that. So हमें पता होना चाहिए कि species कम हो रहे हैं and how are these species distributed in the ecosystem and what role these species are playing in the ecosystem and what is the effect of that extinction on that ecosystem. So we need to know about it. So we need to have good scientific data and experimental data for this, and based upon this data, we will make up practices, good management decisions. So this is the second step. And when we come to the third step, then the third step says that these management decisions or policy decisions should be adaptive. So this should change with time. ऐसा नहीं है कि पुराने टाइम के ही policies अभी तक चल रही हैं, because the environment is continuously evolving, it is dynamically changing, so our policies should also change. And we should also see that humans are an important part of this nature and their interests should also be protected. Although humans are only creating a lot of problems, but still we have to sustain the growing population. So that is why interests of humans should also be protected. So this is a major challenge over here. And then these protective areas are fragmented. So when a local population declines in number, then natural migration to rebuild that population cannot occur. तो इतने ज़्यादा fragmented हैं, isolated हैं, तो इस वजह से अगर कोई species extinct भी हो गया है तो हम दूसरा species का migration difficult है. And also these protected areas are small, so we have to increase their size if we want to conserve them in a better way, if we want to conserve more species. And we have seen that many of these areas are surrounded by human affected environments. So this will again threaten these protected areas with invasive species, air pollution, water, land, everything would eventually get polluted, and it will again lead to these prevalent environmental problems. So we will start different types of species in the next class. So I hope all of you have understood the conservation strategies and how we can manage them. Any doubt to anyone?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No,
So I'm
ma'am.
just downloading the attendance. So okay, thank you all for your attention.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you
Thank you
so much,
so much,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.